There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors workshop series on distribution of goods and services in China. You've joined me for part 3 of this workshop series, which is creating your Chinese distribution business model. Are you marketing to Chinese consumers? Do you need tips on how to market to the Chinese? Have you registered your brand name? Have you protected your products and services? Are you looking to set up an efficient distribution structure? Are you looking to buy and sell goods in China but are not sure how to do this? Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is offering this series of complimentary webinars on this subject in order to provide you with enough information and tools to create your business journey in the Chinese market. Today, you've joined us for part 3, and we're going to be talking about distribution models in China. So some of the questions that I'll be going through today is, how effective is it developing a strategy from home versus on the ground in China? We'll be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of utilizing distributors, sales agents, licensees, and what kind of protection methods you can create to protect your business and your brand. And then we will also be looking at what you need to take into consideration when you want to go on your own. What are basically the trigger points that might push you to go out into China on your own? So who is this webinar for? And I usually like to always start off with this slide. The webinar is geared towards 3 types of people, and I've kind of summed them up as follows. The newbies in China, so those of you that have basically never set foot in China or have only done a couple of business trips, and you are looking for or have already found a couple of opportunities in the Chinese market, and right now you're just trying to educate yourself on how you can protect your business, how you can protect your brand, and what's the best way to go into the market. The next category of people that I'm gearing this presentation to is the startups in China. So companies that have been established for a period of, let's say, 1, 2, 3 years and have been so focused on their core business that they've not been looking at the bigger picture of their business model to see if there has to be any form of adaptation, change, strategy change, or even just focusing on the administrative side of things. So this presentation is also geared to that category of people. You might be surprised by the last category, which is the experienced China hands. You might be wondering, why do people join this type of webinars? Well, there are constantly new regulations and laws that are published in China. For example, January 1st, 2020, there was the new foreign investment law that came into implementation. So there's always new things that are popping up. And these webinars are also useful for that category of individuals. If you've been in China for 5, 10, 15 years, there's always room for improvement. There's always ways to learn on how to improve things. I can tell you now, from 2003, when I landed in Shanghai, to today, I can't even tell you the amount of changes that have occurred in the market, as well as the different types of trends that I've seen. So how the webinar works is that I educate, I teach, I provide a lot of information. So it would be great if you could also interact with me. I might ask you some questions. In fact, one of the questions I forgot to ask on the previous slide was, who are you? Again, if you could be interactive with me, that would give me a guideline of who you are. Are you a newbie? Are you a startup? Are you an experienced hand? And what kind of information you're actually looking and searching for. So ask questions, be interactive, take as much value as you can out of the next 60, 70 minutes so that you walk away with information on basically how to create your distribution model. That's what I'm hoping you will achieve by the end of today, is that you will have an idea of how to create a business plan to be able to distribute into China. We're covering a lot. So there are 2 slides of agenda, which basically shows how much information there is, or how much information I would like to cover today so that you know what should be the next steps in terms of creating this form of business model. Who am I and why am I able to help you? Well, my name is Christina Kohler-Kalucha. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. As mentioned, I've been in Shanghai since 2003, and I've only been working in the corporate services sector. So my focus has been 100% on helping foreign companies with their inbound investment into China and assisting them with all forms of advisory and ongoing services, corporate services, to help make them compliant in China. I've worked with over 500 different types of companies, from industrial sectors to service sectors, education sector to food and beverage, the whole range, helping these companies implement their structures, grow their structures, and expand their structures in China. Also, I am a creator of the China Roadmap program, which is basically just a program for newbies specifically who are looking to go in China and want to make sure that they are following all the steps that are needed to be successful and avoid as many obstacles as possible in the Chinese market. So I'll be touching on that a little bit at the end of the session today. We publish a lot of material free of charge. So if you enjoy these webinars and you want to participate in future webinars, we do webinar series every month. Next month, we're talking about HR compliance in China. In March, we're going to be talking about channel strategy. If you have ideas about webinars or topics you want me to touch on, let me know. Add it into the chat section or email me, and I can always look into adding that into future sessions. But we have a weekly publication. The first one for this year will be going out next Monday. So subscribe, it's free of charge, and you get updates on a weekly basis on things that are occurring in China. So why don't we go off and start today's presentation? And I'm going to start off by saying the following. When I meet a lot of companies that are looking to go into the Chinese market, they come with me with very wide eyes, a lot of excitement, which I'm thrilled that they have. And their first kind of idea is, well, we want to set something up in China so that we're here. And I always kind of tease them and say, well, yeah, it's very sexy to say that you have an office abroad, especially in China. But, you know, you need to understand whether it's the right time for you to actually implement an entity in China or not. And I say this from a variety of reasons. One, to set up a company, to continue with the ongoing costs, which are monthly. There are monthly compliance procedures that you have to abide by. It can be expensive, whether you do that in-house through your own finance team or whether you outsource it. It can add up costs, particularly if you're not using the entity for anything. So you've got to really be aware of whether that entity is going to bring you use or not. In addition to that, it takes between 18 to 24 months to liquidate a company. So if you are in a period of testing, you don't want to set up an entity in China just to test out China, okay? Because if you find out in the end of the day that the market is not for you and there is no potential growth for you in that market, there is no point having an entity in China and then going through a liquidation process that lasts around 18 to 24 months, okay? There are costs associated with that, not a lot, not compared to incorporating, but it's 18 to 24 months where you're thinking in your head, I have an entity I want to liquidate in China, okay? The other thing you need to think about in your international expansion, particularly if you're looking to hire foreigners in China, is to understand what the visa processes are. So if your objective is to only hire foreigners in China, you need to really think whether, not even think, you need to know whether visas can be issued for those foreigners. Now, from my perspective, we're sitting in 2020, probably in the last 24 months, the difficulties in the corporate services sector that we've seen, the trend we've seen, is that foreigners are having more and more difficulties to get visas. So you need to be aware of that fact. There's never a guarantee that a visa will be issued. So it's very important to know if that is your strategy, to have only foreigners on the ground, you know, understand the visa process. Now, whenever you're going into a new jurisdiction for business, whenever you're thinking about international expansion, and whenever China is on your mind, you always have to think about potentially working with partners first, building up your brand, building up your image, and then moving on to thinking about scalability and having more control over your business. So in today's presentation, my goal is to give you all of that advice, everything from not having something on the ground, how you can do what you can do to protect yourself, all the way to having something on the ground. So when I meet with clients, they generally have two goals, either one of each goals, or they'll have both goals in mind. The first thing that they'll have in mind is potentially hiring employees without a structure in China. So saying I want to hire someone in China who's going to be, for example, my sales manager, who's going to build up the business, he's going to work for me, he's going to be traveling a hell of a lot, and he's going to be selling, meeting with different partners, and helping to just build and grow the business. This is all well and good, but there are two things you need to keep in mind. Every single employee in China, whether domestic or non-domestic, meaning international, foreign, they need to be employed by an entity. And it has to be an entity that is registered in China. So having a mainland Chinese person is all well and good in China as long as it's not, that the employment is not direct from overseas. The reason for this is because, at least for mainland Chinese employees, they need to pay social insurance and personal income tax. So they need to be hired by a local entity that handles all of that process. Or they need to be employed through an intermediary that has an entity in China to do all of that process. I have seen way too many companies have what they call freelance agreements with people in China for a number of years. And for some, they've been very lucky. It's panned out very well because there were no complaints. The guy was loyal. There was trust. But I've seen cases where they've wanted to fire individuals who have then gone on to the Labor Arbitration Bureau to say, I've been employed by this entity. There is no entity in China. I have never received social insurance, and now I want to claim it back. And a lot of consequences can then happen. For foreign employees, the biggest issue for them is, in order to reside in China, you need a work permit and a residence visa. So they have to be employed by an entity in China to obtain those two permits. And then obviously personal income tax and social insurance have to be paid. So if you don't want to set up a structure in China and you're not ready to have that level of commitment, then at least use an intermediary to hire those individuals on your behalf, so that at least the employment relationship is justified and you know that all compliance procedures are being done. So personal income tax, social insurance, it's all being done, okay? You want to be able to protect yourself as much as possible. Now, your second goal, especially if you're distributing into the Chinese market, might be that you need to invoice locally and issue fapiaos, but you don't want to have a structure in China yet. So in China, fapiao is literally the translation for invoice, are these beautiful sheets of paper that you see on your screen in front of you. Okay, they are purchased from the tax bureau. They are considered, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but they are like gold. Just to give you an example, if you lose one sheet of these fapiaos, you need to pay a penalty of up to 10,000 RMB. So this is something that's very critical in China in terms of fapiaos. Now, when you are bidding for certain projects, or you are talking to, I don't know, retailers, or you are talking to end customers, you know, for your B2B business, you might have some people say, I don't want to transact with a foreign company. I only want to transact with local companies, and I want to be able to receive a fapiao. So in order to not lose out on that business deal, you should be fully aware that there are companies on the ground in China that can act as invoicing agents. So if you're looking to provide a service, or you're looking to trade, you will have invoicing agents for the service sector, and you will have intermediary trading agents, import-export agents that can help you handle those transactions. Now, obviously, there's a lot of trust that has to befall these agents, because you know you're relying on them to receive the funds from the customer and remit the funds back to you overseas. But you have to rely on that if you don't want to have a structure in China. Okay, that would probably be the biggest con or disadvantage associated with using one of these agents. So let's talk about 6 ways to distribute in China without setting up an office or an entity in China. Okay, so let's talk about first direct sales. Okay, what can you do from your home office? Now, the first is you could do e-commerce from your own website or mobile app. Okay, not really the biggest advantage, but as mentioned in yesterday's webinar, you know, think about the marketing tools, right? Are you going to set up a WeChat account? Are you going to have a .cn domain name? Are you going to have your own website? Think about all of these in terms of doing e-commerce directly in China. And tomorrow, by the way, I am going to be talking about cross-border e-commerce and setting up those type of business models and what you can and cannot do from home. So if e-commerce is one of the avenues you want to understand more about, do join us in tomorrow's session. The second option, which I'll also be talking about in tomorrow's session, is digital sales. So via certain e-commerce platforms like Tmall, Taobao, JD.com, etc. So, you know, this is all kind of, you're talking e-commerce, digital avenues. But then obviously you have direct B2B sales. So traditionally, what do companies do? Well, traditionally you might meet customers on trade shows or through a network or through referrals. And basically these customers in China contractually work with you in your home jurisdiction. It still happens. However, you might meet certain companies like state-owned enterprises or certain multinationals that only want to transact with local entities. So this is where you got to weigh out the pros and cons of how you're going to manage that. The second way of distributing in China is using sales representatives and agents. And I just want to explain what's the difference between sales reps and agents and distributors. Sales reps purely are doing selling, meaning that they don't hold any form of inventory. Okay, they're purely selling, and contractually it's still the customer in China contracting overseas and goods flowing direct. Okay, but basically the advantage of having sales reps or using a sales agent is that they can help you open the doors for your unknown brand. So generally speaking, they will help you to research your product, understand what is the level of brand awareness. They will create, probably I would be fair to say, your entire ecosystem of customers and partners, and build up those relationships to be able to sell. Now, something you need to keep in mind with sales reps and agents is the following, and I had this case with a Spanish client of mine in the past, where they hired a sales agent to work in China. He was mainland Chinese, but also spoke fluent Spanish, which was a big advantage. He was employed through our firm. We acted as an intermediary to hire him. And for about 18 to 24 months, he tested the market. Now, there were definitely deals that went through, but at the end of the 24 months, the Spanish company did a complete evaluation of the Chinese market and said, okay, what is our return on investment over the last 24 months by hiring someone locally and the amount of deals that were generated? And their conclusion after that 24 months was, China is not a lucrative market for us, and we want to basically exit this individual because the cost is too high for us to maintain him there. And they even offered him to be based in Spain because that would have been cheaper than having him locally in China to continue the China business. But then he was also going to work on other Asian jurisdictions. So they did a whole evaluation after 24 months. Now, one of the items that I put at the end here is you can work with sales reps and agents that are companies in China. But one thing that, just as a tip that I would recommend, is keep asking yourself, is the sales rep that is appointed to my company, is he good? Do you think he'd be loyal to you? And do you think at some point you could poach him to work for you full time? Okay. So, you know, this could be a starting point where you work with a sales agent company and you use that sales agent company for, let's say, a year or two. But the individual that is specifically working for you, is he good? Is he not good? Etc. So think, you know, you always have to think about that. As I mentioned in my case study just now, you can also use professional employment organizations to hire individuals on your behalf. So it means that you can recruit someone on your own who probably has the background, the profile, the experience, the network, who you want to work ultimately full-time for you, but you don't want to set up an entity to hire him. So you want to use a professional employment organization to do that hiring, right? Using an intermediary basically to do that. There are local firms called the Foreign Enterprise Service Company, or FESCO, but there are also a bunch of other firms. Even at Woodburn, we offer this type of service, but there's a bunch of us. There are also chambers of commerce that offer these types of services, where you can hire these individuals, and they would be based in China, running, working from home, running out, doing sales projects, and then you're doing an evaluation after a certain period of time to know whether the business is viable or not. Is using distributors, which everybody knows and everybody talks about. Now, the advantage of distributors is that generally distributors will do everything for you. They will purchase your product, they will warehouse and ship it, they will also do marketing and sales in most instances. And at the end of today's presentation, I'll be talking about one case study in particular where I want to give you a full flow of what their China journey has been. But they also started off with a distributor in China. And this client did both offline and online sales, meaning there was a retail store and they worked with different e-commerce platforms, and the distributor handled everything. And in fact, the distributor even hired people because the business kept growing, there was a team of people basically assigned with this one client. Now, obviously, working with a distributor has greater risk because the distributor is also taking on more liability. So you've definitely got to be wary of the distributor registering your trademarks, having control over your marketing tools, being the sole relationship developer with various e-commerce platforms, retail landlords, all of this type of thing, because at some point you may want to take over that business. Now, the biggest thing I'm going to say about distributors is the following. You need to be able to choose the right distributor for your business, or choose a few distributors for your business. My suggestion would be never to work with just one distributor. You don't want to place all your eggs in one basket and have it, go very sour in 12 months' time. So China is enormous, which is why probably the first thing you should think about is market segmentation. Where do you want to sell, right? You're talking about a territory that is enormous. If you meet a distributor that's based out of Beijing, most likely his network and experience will be for northern China. If you meet a distributor that's in Guangzhou, probably his network of retailers and customers will be for southern China. You can't expect someone, unless they are huge and they have a multitude of offices throughout China, to have a network in all of China. It doesn't happen. Okay, so understand, where you want to be in China, and that's research that you have to do. Okay, one thing I will say as a case study for distributors is the following. I had a client a long time ago who was negotiating with a distributor prior to doing any form of business, and she called me up just for some simple advice, and she said, I've been speaking to this distributor, and I want to brainstorm with you that I'm on the right here. She said, we're negotiating with him and he's being very difficult on certain points in the contract. He says that we can't have any information about final price. So, for example, they're going to work with the retailers. The distributor will deal with the retailers directly, but we're not allowed to know what final price of the retailers. Like, okay, well, that's a bit strange. Number two, they want to have full power and authority over all marketing decisions. And I said, okay. So, she kept going on and on and on. I said, well, is this something that you want? Do you want to give all of this control to the distributor? Or do you want to have full transparency with your distributor? If you want to have full transparency because you believe that at some point you want to go it alone, then this distributor is not the right one for you. And if he's nagging and negotiating continuously with you, then, you know, you've got to have already this gut instinct that things aren't going to go well. So what is very important when you're working with distributors is understanding what you want from them, what's your short and long-term vision, how much transparency do you need and do you want, and understand how to move forward from there, okay? Another thing that you should keep in mind with distributors, as well as with sales agents, etc., you should create KPIs for them. A lot of people forget to do this. So creating key performance indices, for example, what should be the goal for 2020 in terms of sales? What should the distributor achieve for you? What do you want them to achieve for you? Because that will also garner the motivation that they might have to work with you. If your business is peanuts, then they won't assign so many people to you. But you've got to know exactly, you know, what are their roles and responsibilities and what should be the goal for that year. The next way of doing things is licensing. But licensing obviously has the disadvantage that you're giving away pretty much all control of your product, your name, your program, your IP, your design, your technology to a licensee. And most likely there will be a lack of transparency in doing this. But if you're okay with that, and if you're okay starting off like that, then there's no issues. However, at some point, I guarantee you'll want to go and do it on your own. Make sure your contract is bulletproof, that any type of exit clause is thoroughly thought out, okay? That eventually ownership goes back to you. And last but not least, franchising. And obviously, we all know that franchising is only specific to certain industries, certain sectors. But franchising is also an option where, again, you know, a franchisee basically is allowed to kind of go into a company and buy its an existing name, operations, marketing, recipes for success, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, control is probably an issue. Maintaining, how do you call that, brand, you know, maintaining the value of your brand is also critical. You know, are you sure that they're providing the same quality of service that you are providing in your home jurisdiction? That's probably the key. So these are the 6 ways of thinking about doing business in China without having a structure on the ground. So ultimately, you are utilizing partners on the ground to help you develop your business, whether it's individuals or companies. Now, I want to go into a case study. And this is a case study of a company who has grown their, so this company actually doesn't really exist. It's for the purpose of today's session that I kind of wanted to show the growth and the phases that a company can go through to build up their business in China, okay? So let's just say you're a family-owned business founded in the UK in 1970. So there's probably a very strong brand awareness associated with that family. Specialized in healthcare products, very strong brand identity, already have customers in the UK, EU, North America, so well experienced in international trade and expansion. Trend is starting that customers in China are inquiring about the purchase of their products. Now, how does that usually happen? It happens because consumers in China are now traveling abroad. So if they go into a store, let's say Boots in the UK, and they see this premium healthcare product, they might start inquiring, oh, you know, if I buy it here, can I also buy it in China? Now, what gets a little bit more complicated is that for this company, 70% of the production is in the UK and 30% of the production is outsourced to China. So what have they done? Right now, they have their head office in the UK and they have a representative office in China handling just very simply the communication between the production, between the factories, looking at merchandising, and definitely doing quality control inspections, okay? So this company already is a little bit more advanced in China because they're producing there and they already have probably their suppliers on hand. But now they have to think about a sales strategy, okay? So what is the strategy of the company? There is potentially a high level of interest in their premium products in Asia. So What do they want to do? They want to do a progressive expansion strategy in China and APAC. They want to minimize the investment requirements to keep, market exit option available to them. And they want to optimize maintenance costs and tax efficiency within the structures. Okay. So let's look at scenario one of this client. Okay, this is scenario one. Scenario one is that they are going to establish a Hong Kong company that has commercial and economic substance. And this Hong Kong company, because it's not based in China, will work with distributors or import agents to be able to bring the products into China and then sell to the Chinese consumers. At the same time, the Hong Kong subsidiary is also going to think or look at other APAC regions, okay? Because as I mentioned on the previous slide, their goal is not just Greater China, it's also APAC. Now, Hong Kong today, there's obviously a lot of political instability in the region. I can say because my brother is based there, my parents are based there, it's very fair to say that generally speaking, it's business as usual. It's obviously not great that the protests are occurring and that the protests have started to become violent, but obviously if you avoid the districts in which the protests are occurring, then, from a day-to-day perspective, you're not involved in it. That's basically how my parents who are in their 70s see it as an inconvenience to have protests. But, when you're looking at it from a business perspective, again, it's business as usual. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about the Hong Kong subsidiary is the following. First of all, Hong Kong is not China. Now, you can also say Hong Kong. You could say Singapore if you wanted. I've put Hong Kong here just because we have an office in Hong Kong, and but you could use Singapore. You could use another jurisdiction. But the idea of having something not in China probably eases your pain because the investment in places like Hong Kong and Singapore is minimal, much less than it is in China. The ongoing compliance or maintenance procedures for Hong Kong, Singapore, other types of companies like this are much less than they are in China because in those jurisdictions, things happen only annually, not monthly. So it's a very nice stepping stone into China to be able to sell. Now, with Hong Kong, you can also hire individuals there that have full experience, not only with China, but also with the APAC region. And these are your advisors or your partners that can speak perfect English. They are westernized, and they can help you to build your network and experience, build trust, etc. They're basically like your local advisors. Now, scenario two in this situation is that you have a Hong Kong company that is, because as we saw from the assumptions, 70% of the production is in the UK and 30% of the production is in China. So how does that all work? Well, you will have PRC suppliers in China. You will also have suppliers in the UK. Hong Kong will buy from these suppliers and sell them to the distributors in China, as well as into the other APAC regions. As mentioned earlier, the UK company has a representative office that's handling quality control and inspections. Now, the only downside to this flow is the fact that a Hong Kong company is considered still outside of China, meaning that when a Hong Kong company purchases from a PRC supplier, the goods have to be exported and then re-imported, which means there are further customs duties associated. So that's what makes Hong Kong a little bit tricky when you're trying to buy domestically, okay? In those situations, if you buy and sell domestically, I would probably say have the PRC distributor buy from the supplier and then sell to the consumer. Now, the disadvantage of that is that your distributor then knows who your suppliers are and where all the production is occurring, okay? So that gets into a very tricky situation. But this is something that you can also create as a type of solution for you. The third scenario, now as you see, this is all kind of phase development where your structure gets, I don't want to say more complex, but probably as your business grows, it will provide you with trigger points to say, right, we are ready at this point to go with X, Y, and Z, okay? So as you can see in scenario 3, what I've done is I've only just added that entity in China that is going to be solely responsible for the China business, buying from the Chinese suppliers and selling to the Chinese customers. And at this point, you have then also eliminated the distributors, because now you're taking full control over the business. The Hong Kong subsidiary is then responsible basically for APAC, okay? Meaning that they're going to buy from suppliers in China or the UK and sell then to the APAC customers directly. The representative office is, now that you have the China subsidiary, is not really a necessity. I've kept it in there to know that it's probably still going to be there following from scenario 2. So at this point, you have a decision whether you want to kind of consolidate everything under the full China subsidiary and then close down the representative office, which is probably what I would recommend you to do, because then you would have less cost associated. And then it just becomes a very simple APAC region structure where you have Hong Kong or Singapore doing APAC, and you have a China entity that's doing all the domestic business. Now, we're going to get into a scenario 4 that doesn't really fall under it, but I see a lot of companies that are going into this trend. Scenario 4 comes under play when you want to have Chinese investors in your business. And this is something that is happening more and more frequently, where foreign companies are looking for that type of Chinese investment. The discussions I've been having have been extremely varied, depending on the objective and goal of the shareholders. But basically, you have options. If you want to have Chinese investors, you can tell the Chinese investors, we would like you to invest in our parent company. The dilemma that the Chinese investors will face is potentially that they cannot bring their money out of China, in which case you may want to have a joint venture with these Chinese investors in China. Okay, now these Chinese investors can be twofold. One, they can have money, or two, they can have the connections, meaning that they will have the network that you need to develop your business. Money is always an issue. Probably I would say, you need to evaluate whether getting Chinese money is good for your business or not. You need to evaluate also then really what type of network does your Chinese investor have, and most importantly, does he really have it? Okay. Now, I've put here using the joint venture for e-commerce and retail functions. It can be for so many other things as well. Now, I've also listed here, which you might find interesting, a Chinese subsidiary that's wholly owned by the UK company. And the reason why I've put that inside is because you might have done scenario 3, meaning you will have your own entity in China, but you don't necessarily want the Chinese investor to be in that entity to protect your business. You might want to have a separate joint venture completely that has the Chinese investor, and you might want to set up that joint venture under a Hong Kong subsidiary or not. The actual structure and ownership is always something that is really case by case with companies. But I just wanted to show you this so you kind of have an overview of how you can develop your business depending on the direction that you want to go to. Whether you want to really do it on your own, whether you want to start getting Chinese investors or not, etc. And you can see how you can also develop it phase 1, phase 1 with distributors, phase 2 alone, phase 3 gets a bit more complicated, phase 4 then has joint ventures, etc. in it. So it's a matter of evaluating what fits you the best. Now, I don't want to leave this presentation without talking about how to beware of the partners that you meet in China. Because as you can probably see from all of the information I've provided so far, particularly the 6 ways of doing business in China without having a structure, but also looking at when you do things alone, you will still need partners to guide and help you. So it is extremely important that you conduct a due diligence, because scams are very well known in China. You can have a lot of lack of transparency amongst partners, and obviously there's cultural barriers, there's language barriers, etc. So you should want to conduct a due diligence with your partners. Now, I've provided here a guideline for you of things that you can do yourself, okay, when you are meeting with partners and discussions are moving forward. So what you can do when you are meeting with partners and the discussions look very fruitful and positive and advantageous, you need to start talking to them about the following, saying, I would like to see your business license. I would like to see your tax certificates. If you have IP, I would like to know what type of IP you own. Can I see your lease agreement? Are you really located in that address that you're saying? And you can always ask for audit documents, just to have a bit of background. Now, obviously, it's up to the partner to decide what they're going to provide you with. They might not feel comfortable providing you with the financial documents because they'll say, well, it's none of your business. But the business license has nothing in there that actually you could not get from the Chinese government yourself, quite frankly. There's an online website where you can just go in, type a Chinese company's name, and you'll get all the information that's on your on the business license. So asking at a minimum for the business license, not a big deal in China, because either way you could get it on your own. But ask, what harm is there in asking for these things? And you know, it kind of gives the partner then an indication that you want to do a check on them, but you don't want to go through a secret way or a hidden way. You just want to reach out to them directly and have this open and transparent conversation. So definitely request this as a standard practice, put it in your operational guidelines. You know, when you're talking to partners in China, this is what you should be doing, okay? Now, on top of that, do your own just basic due diligence, okay? So first of all, conduct an online search. Use both English and Chinese websites. So for China, you can use Bing. For English, use Google. If they provide you with a business card, contact the phone numbers, okay? Then what you want to do is also use certain contacts to authorize the information, right? To make sure that the information is correct. Usually when you talk to distributors, they'll probably say, oh, XYZ are our customers. We have these suppliers. These are our competitors. So, I mean, that's probably part of their pitch, right? To say who are their customers and suppliers. Well, prove it. Talk to their customers. Talk to their suppliers. Understand what is the relationship like. Are there any pros and cons in terms of working with them? Ask for foreign references. So, you know, if they are distributors and they've worked with other foreign suppliers, talk to those foreign suppliers. Ask them for contact information. Check the registered address. So what you want to do is once you get a copy of the business license, are they actually located in that office address? Don't make an appointment, just go and show up. You can obtain the AIC file. Like I said, you could just go online, or you can use an agent or a lawyer to do that for you. It's really easy to do. Check the business license, check that there's a company CHOP. And then what you might want to ask for is, and this is obviously going to happen probably further down the line in the discussions, is where do they bank? And can they provide the banking details? Because you want to know that you are sending, or that you are going to receive money from a corporate client versus a individual, and that happens quite a lot. And then last but not least, you know, checking the financial report or the audit report is something that you can also try and do and try and obtain, again, either through a lawyer or an agent. Now, just signs of suspicion. I mean, you know, I'm going to give you a list here, but obviously use your gut instinct. But if any of these things pop up, then you'll kind of get a feeling. If it's all too good to be true, is probably a very good sign that something's not going to go well. If the website is only in English and there's no Chinese website, I always find that odd, especially if they are entities that are looking to help you to sell into China. What you might also want to do is do a digital check on them. That I haven't added in here, but you might also want to check if they have a WeChat corporate account. You might want to check if there's been any mention of them on other digital platforms. If they're pushing you all the time, so the Chinese know, basically the Chinese are really good at this, they know that Westerners have no patience. So if they're pushing you all the time and trying to speed up the process, don't play into it. Don't rush yourself. Take your time and see how things progress. If there's no verifiable track record, if you've done a bit of your own online research and if you notice that, you know, it feels like it's probably just a one-man show, then that's probably a sign. If there's no company email address, now in China, that's pretty common that there's no company email address. That does not necessarily mean it's a big sign of suspicion, but it depends on how large of a company you're going to be transacting with. So if they're very large, or they're saying they're very large and they don't have a company email address, I would find that weird. If they're a small, very small distributor, you know, not more than 10, 15 employees, it would be very common that they don't have, they probably all use their personal emails. If the information doesn't add up, use your gut. It's probably telling you something is not right. If they have no production facilities, no license, or no staff, or you haven't met, or you haven't seen the business license, or you haven't met other employees, then it might be a bit weird. If they're considerably cheaper than market average price, also weird. If your contact does not work for the company, that's also weird, okay? You should know whether they are an employee of the company or not. If, in terms of communications, you're having constant change of contact person, well, that's just a bit of instability. Do you want that? Don't you want that? If they are requesting for fees or upfront payments, don't do that. You don't know them yet, right? You know, if the distributor is saying, we want to market everything for you, but you need to help us with the cost. No, let them prove themselves to you, okay? Or discuss payment terms, right, on how things will work. Now I kind of want to move on. So that's sort of how to really evaluate and do your own due diligence on a partner. Obviously, you can outsource that due diligence to someone. They can also probably do a credit check and look a little bit at the media history to see if anything bad has popped up. Now I want to kind of touch on the trigger points for moving forward in the market. So these are actually questions I've gathered together because these are things that I generally ask clients to have my own background information on their business, but also kind of to hope that they will consider this as questions they should ask themselves for their business plan. But the first question is, what volume of business have you achieved in China? And if this is continuously growing, then potentially that might be a trigger point for you to say, right, it's time for us to do things on our own. What value of business have you achieved? So, you know, you have to look both at volume and value. Is that a trigger point for us to say, you know what, now it's time to set up our own entity? Are you being asked to issue fapiaos, those invoices in your own company name? So, you know, you might have some companies say, okay, we'll work with the intermediary for a certain period of time, but at some point we want to see that you have your own entity and we want to see that it's your own company name on that fapiao. That might be a trigger point for you. Are you being asked for local representation? Are people saying we want to see your office? Are people saying we want to see your team? Are they asking to see a manager? Then maybe you need to set up your own entity and hire individuals or have that sales agent become the general manager. Are you being asked to stock inventory? Now, if you're using a distributor, they will stock the inventory on your behalf. So, you know, are you being asked to stock inventory, have just-in-time deliveries, etc.? Do you need to increase your brand image? Do you feel like by having an entity in China, it will give you the ability to do more in terms of brand awareness? Do you need an office and warehousing facility? Or, and then the last point, do you need to start marketing locally and supervise those initiatives? Meaning having your own in-house marketing team and branding team to supervise those initiatives. So there's a lot of trigger points here. Other trigger points will also be, do I need a team on the ground that helps with the supply chain? Do I need a team on the ground that will help with IT infrastructure? Do I need a team on the ground that will be more responsible for finance? There's so many questions you can ask yourself that can then be the trigger points as to whether you want to move forward, okay, in China. Now, obviously, the advantages of incorporating a structure in China are many, and it always will come down to your budget. Do you have the ability to do it? Are you ready to do it? But I want to give you these things from the perspective of a customer, okay? Basically, the customer, if he sees that you have an entity in China, he's going to see the commitment you're making to the Chinese market. So he will say at that point then, you have a team on the ground that I can build even stronger relationships with and maybe even develop the business more. It increases your brand image and profile to the customer as well. You know, it's all about customer service, right? If you have a team of people on the ground, it means that your customers can communicate much better. You obviously have the ability to hire people in your own company name. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight here is using an intermediary company, whether a PEO or someone else, to hire people does not always provide a sense of stability to the staff and also a sense of security. You know, you're hiring people initially, maybe one or two, maybe 1, 2, 3, and they're not hired by an entity that you own. How is that going to bring a sense of loyalty, trust, long-term vision to the employee, right? Obviously, you want to show employees, I mean, the last thing that you want in China is turnover, right? I mean, and turnover is, you know, can be quite high in China. That's really the last thing you want. So at least have an entity in China provides that stability, provides also a sense of how can I be promoted within the organization, etc. Having your own entity gives you the ability to issue fapiaos in your own company name. And I think ultimately it gives you also financial control over payments, payment receipts, and outbound payments as well. Having your own entity gives you ultimate control to manage your business. It gives you control over all your tools that you are going to be utilizing to build your brand, build your business, and grow your business. It helps to give you the ability to own specific licenses. Yesterday, I went through a very good example of how one company went through an intermediary to get an ICP license and how that didn't pan out so well. But it gives you that control to own specific licenses and gives you the ability to own all of the necessary marketing tools as well. So that just gives you an idea of the advantages of incorporating a structure in China in the end. Now I kind of want to lead into the China Roadmap program, okay? So we've devised a roadmap for companies that are looking to grasp at a China opportunity, implement a compliant and safe structure, and grow the business exponentially. And I just want to iterate here, I am not emphasizing on actually implementing a physical structure in China, and people sometimes misconstrue that. I am saying you know what type of structure you want to develop in, let's say, phase 1 of your business. So implement it properly, okay? This is the China Roadmap program, which ultimately looks at milestone number 1, which is opportunity. You've received an inquiry or you see a potential in the market. Well, the first thing that you have to do is educate yourself. You have to do research. You have to do market segmentation, product testing, advertise testing, competitor benchmarking, etc. You have to do that form of research to know what is your return on investment. Is there a return on investment? Is there real potential? And then you need to create a strategy and a budget. And that strategy should entail several phases of your China journey, from your short-term goals to your long-term goals and objectives. Once you've got the first milestone kind of completed, you move on to the second milestone, which is implementation. And implementation can mean incorporating your own entity, but it can also just mean incorporating proper, clear, transparent trade transactions or service transactions from your home jurisdiction, okay? In order to do that, you have to build an ecosystem. You have to have your own network, okay? Either that's going to come in the form of an individual you want to hire, or you're going out to China every so often to network and meet people. The next step is protecting your business, your brand, and that means protecting your IP. It means protecting protecting yourself contractually, making sure there are contracts that exist, etc. And then it's about system processes, ultimately operational guidelines. Creating operational guidelines so that your team knows exactly how to work with China. Doing due diligences, making sure that when you do a trade transaction, there is an operational guideline from what should be in a contract, how the invoice should look, should the invoice be with or without taxes, who should pay the taxes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, you want these system processes to be bulletproof. Obviously, not everything is going to match 100%, but without an operational guideline, your team won't know how to deal with China from abroad. Okay, but on top of that, if you do incorporate in China, your team on the ground needs operational guidelines to make sure that they remain in compliance. Once the implementation is kind of done, then you move on to growth, and that should be your ultimate goal, should be focus. Okay, but in order to focus and know how to grow, you got to look at the numbers, and most importantly, you got to be able to read and analyze those numbers, because without understanding the financial status of a company, there is no way you know in which direction to move. Okay, you don't know if you should add headcount, if you should let go of people. You don't know if you can expand into other service categories or product categories. You don't know if maybe you should think about production locally. You can't analyze on anything. So once you have that analysis in place, then you have an absolute focus on how you should grow. And as I said earlier in this presentation, this China roadmap is really geared more to the newbies, but you can kind of see that anybody who's in the startup phase or also any experienced hand, they should be continuously following this roadmap and updating it every year, every 6 months, to know exactly where they stand and continue to process their education. Now, 6 ways that I can help you to create your distribution business model following the China Roadmap program is obviously providing advisory and education, looking then at the implementation of your business model, what options do you have, and that's all part of the education and advisory stage. You should also be thinking about protection, doing system processes, contract formulations, and then obviously doing the ongoing controlling over the business model. Now, if you are interested to talk about creating your own distribution model, don't hesitate to reach out to me. In the chat box, I am going to add the link to where you can hop into my diary and set up a time with me to talk for 30 minutes, an hour, as you wish, okay? So, if you are interested, go ahead and just book a strategy session with me. So now we're on to the Q&A. So unfortunately, no questions have come in. So not much interaction today. I hope you all found this really interesting. So maybe I can use this time then to just sum up, because we've hit almost 60 minutes. And I don't want to leave without having a couple of questions on hand, but maybe I can just sum up a little bit on today's presentation. I think to be able to summarize is basically to say that, the #1 outcome probably that I want you to get out of this presentation is the fact that you cannot distribute in China alone. At least if you're a newbie and you're probably in the startup phase, you can't do it alone. You need to work with people that have networks, distributors, individuals that can garner business for you, okay? So make sure that when you are creating this network of yours to know who you want to work with long term, that you do the appropriate due diligence on them. And try and meet as many people as possible. I'd probably also highlight, use local chambers of commerce. So if you're from the UK, just know there's the China-Britain Business Council. There is also the British Chamber of Commerce locally in China, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Guangzhou, in Wuhan. If you're from the US, you have the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, which is one of the largest in the world in terms of members. So, that already is a really great starting point to build up your network and be introduced to people. And be introduced simply to distributors as well. And probably the second thing I'd love for you to get out of this is remember that your China journey evolves. So, I'm hoping that through the diagrams that you saw today, you can start small and then you can build your business as far as you would like it to go, even to a stage of a joint venture where you're getting Chinese investment capital to help you to grow your business. So keep reminding yourself that your China journey will evolve, which is probably why it's really important in your business plan to have both a short and long-term vision of what you want your company to look like. Well, because there were no questions there, I am going to move again. If you want to book a strategy session with me, please do. The link is in the chat section of your control panel. And last but not least, we have one final session tomorrow, which will be about developing your e-commerce business model. We're going to be focusing there really on, can you ship your product? What criteria is there to ship products? We're going to be looking at different cross-border e-commerce models and talk a little bit about strategy. So if you want to join that, you can register on our webpage at the events section. I'll add that also into the chat section of the control panel, and you can then register there for the last event. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I appreciate you coming out for 60, 70 minutes and talking with me and listening to me. I hope I was able to provide you with enough information. And if you do have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.